This writing and language question is absolutely perfect for me to teach you about relative conjunctions and relative clauses. And it's specifically annoying to me because this is one of the mistakes that one of my clients made. And she knows about relative conjunctions and she knows about relative clauses. It's just like a careless mistake, but I want to use it as an opportunity to teach her, but also to teach you to spot problems like these in the future. So as you can see, she picked answer choice D. And answer choice D was absolutely wrong because the word which is something that's called a relative conjunction. There's only 5 relative conjunctions, easy for us to remember. 4 of them will begin with the letter W, and 1 of them will begin with the letter T. What do we need to know about relative conjunctions before we even announce them? What we need to know is that they begin something that's called a relative clause. And if there is a verb that is inside of that relative clause, we're not going to think of that verb as sentence forming because it will be inside of its own relative clause ecosystem. It's not participating in a big subject and a big verb structure. So just keep that in mind. So here they are. Which, who, whom, whose, and that. These are all your relative conjunctions. They begin relative clauses. Awesome. So what the student was telling me here is that, hey, Katya, I can actually do this. Which is, I like to say that, that's a crime against the College Board. There are only 2 use cases for semicolons. This, and if you have items on a list that have commas inside of them, we call them just like fat items on the list. You're going to put semicolons in between. That's all you're going to use your semicolons for. You are not allowed to do this. C is wrong for a different reason, because here we have a wild species subject. Is going to be my verb. This is going to be an independent clause, and we're not allowed to do this. This is going to be either called comma splice or a run-on sentence. This is also a crime against the College Board, so C is out. Let's take a look at A. Let's actually read this whole sentence or two. Okay, so it begins like this. Until recently, that's just an opening phrase. And I always like to say that writers, when they write their sentences, they kind of give a promise to always begin with a subject. And when they do not begin with a subject, they apologize with a comma. So scientists thought, subject, verb. And then you guys can probably see a familiar word, the word that. So everything that will come after the word that. The Przewalski horse, an endangered species living in Central America, in Central Asia. By the way, this is offset with commas on both sides. It's either called a noun phrase, that's what we call it in Severson method. You can also might have heard of this as a positive, but it's a comma sandwich. This is giving a definition to Przewalski horse and was the only remaining truly wild horse species. In theory, it's absolutely normal for us to put a period here. So to some of you, answer choice A could be really attractive. But remember, a period can only go between 2 independent clauses. So we checked that on the left, we have an independent clause. It has the subject, scientist, and has the verb, thought. It even has a relative clause, but at least we have one independent clause. But on the right, you don't have an independent clause. So you have your subject, a wild species, and then you do have a verb, which is were domesticated. But the problem here is that this verb only comes after the word whose, and you know now that whose is a relative conjunction. So everything that comes after the word whose is a relative clause and therefore is not participating in the rest of the sentence. It's not giving it a verb. It's not giving it a subject. It is its own little structure. And here, a wild species being one, the verb is missing. Being is not a verb. Being, actually, the part of speech here will be a gerund, and gerund is not a verb. If you did not know that, write this down. Gerunds are not verbs. If you don't know what gerunds are, those are words that end in ing. So therefore, the only possible choice is B. Dash, that is, it's kind of like, let me tell you what truly wild horse species are. Let me give you the definition. One whose ancestors were never domesticated by humans. I think in this little example, we encountered so many relative clauses and relative conjunctions that this is a really good way for you to remember them. So here's what they are. There's probably always going to be a comma in front of which. There's probably never going to be a comma in front of that, but don't take my word for it. There are situations where the College Board can create a scenario for you where there will be a comma in front of that, where there will be no comma in front of which. But this is just like a general recommendation. And if there are verbs inside of the relative clause, do not consider them main verbs that are clause forming that will decide whether something is an independent clause or not. I hope this really helped you.